Morning, everyone. This week, I would like to just reiterate the most important thing to understand if you're in the business of revising and remembering stuff in order to pass an exam on a particular date. Then the time and effort that you put in needs to be efficient. It needs to work. It needs to be a successful strategy that you're using. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it's very, very important to appreciate there are 3 parts to what you need to do. So we human beings have got a lot in common with each other. So human beings need to pay attention to these 3 things. Now, you might be an exceptional human being. In fact, I'm sure you are an exceptional human being in many, many ways. When it comes to revision, we need to spend time paying attention to these 3 things in order to give ourselves the very best chance of remembering enough to get us through the exam. And enough, to my mind, is a good solid pass mark in the 70-80% range, because then you can go into the exam knowing that you absolutely know enough. Then you can concentrate on the questions and doing your best with the questions and answering those, rather than going in hoping like mad that certain things aren't going to be covered because you know that you haven't done work in those areas. I want you to go into the exam absolutely convinced that you know your stuff, and you will if you pay attention to these 3 things. If you follow the Genius Material revision system, you are bound to remember enough to get you a very high pass mark. If you find that you're not getting those high pass marks, if you find that when it comes to testing yourself on short chunks that you're learning, that you're not remembering what you intend to remember, then it will be because of one of these 3 things, or maybe more than one of these 3 things. This is like bits of a jigsaw puzzle. It's like getting to the end of the jigsaw puzzle and discovering that you're missing a piece. If you don't pay attention to the things that I'm going to talk about today, then you are setting yourselves up to have a very tough time of it in the exam. And I know from conversations that I've had that many, many people have had less than satisfactory experiences with their exams, or more to the point with their exam results, that they feel that they've worked very hard, but not enough information has stayed in their heads in order to do the best they can in the exam, and they've not necessarily passed the exams, or they've just scraped by. I do know of people who have taken an exam up to 3 times and just pipped it each time. Well, imagine the time wasted, the energy wasted, the effect on your self-esteem and confidence. But that's not going to be you chaps now, because now you're aware of what you've got to do. And once you know these things, it becomes really obvious, doesn't it? And in fact, if you look back over the way that you used to revise, I bet you're wondering why on earth you thought that was going to work. It's amazing that once we have the right information in any area, whether it's about revision or something else, once we have the right information, everything just clicks into place. So, the 3 keys to learning. You've seen this before, you've heard me talk about it before. I talk about it everywhere. The ebooks, the training videos, the webinars, any chance I get, I talk about the 3 keys to learning. So now you know that you've got to spend enough time with the information in the first place for your brain to make a pattern of it and send it to your long-term memory. There's been somebody, one of our members, who I've been talking to recently, who really piled the pressure on for himself. He was trying to cram all of his revision into just a few weeks before the exam. And that's really just not a good idea because of the stress that it causes. He really was up against it, and in effect what was happening then was that because he had so many chunks to cover every day, and he'd worked it all out, he'd timetabled it all, so he's been quite logical about it, and had this system set up where he's going to cover this number of chunks every day until the exam. He didn't build in time to go back over it, but he was approaching each chunk, the new chunks, every day. But because he was up against it time-wise, he wasn't spending enough time with the information in the first place. So he was quite discombobulated to find that he wasn't remembering what he intended to remember. So it's very important that you give yourself a long enough run up to an exam that you can just spend, each day when you get the opportunity, some relaxed quality time with the information, so that you're giving yourself the best chance not just to get through the exams comfortably, but the best chance to approach it sensibly and to have a life as well. I know that you've got very busy jobs, and of course you've got a life, you've got families, you've got other people who need your attention. So make sure you have enough of a run-up, and so that you can spend enough time with the information in the first place. Because once you've done that, the rest is plain sailing. Let's have a look at number 2. You need to create notes in a form your brain likes. Now, by this, first of all, I'm talking about creating notes. Notes come in an infinite number of shapes and sizes. There are all sorts of ways to manipulate the information that comes in your course manual or on a seminar, or however you get to hear about it on an audio track, or however you get the information in the first place. You have got to do something with the information. I'm calling it creating notes. For some people, that will be recording their voices, talking the notes through onto a recording device. But I still mean that's creating notes. Okay, so I don't mean necessarily taking a pen and writing words. However it is that you manipulate the information, that's what I mean by creating notes. And in a form that your brain likes, I am talking about your brain. Now, since I believe that we're all human beings here on this call, I believe that we will have a lot in common when it comes to processing, storing and retrieving information. However, there are differences between us. None of us do those things in exactly the same way. As you experiment with the way that you create your notes, you will begin to discover your way of doing it. In the box to the right there, I've put some ideas in there: space, patterns, colour, size, highlight, keywords, bullet points, numbering, pictures, rule of 7 or fewer. I'm hoping by now some of those things are going to be familiar to you. If not, then go through your ebook again. Go and have a look at training videos 1 and 3 in particular. So we've talked about that a lot in the past. So you've got to spend enough time with the information in the first place, and you will be doing that if you're spending some creative time creating some notes, using some of those ideas, and specifically using the ideas that are good for your learning type. The third part, and this I think takes a lot of people by surprise, the third part is paying attention to the revision cycle. I've mentioned before that we've got parts of our brain that just tick along for us automatically. Much of our bodies are working in the background on our behalf without us having to think about it. Your heart beating, your blood pressure, the blood going around your entire body to all the parts that need it, your lymphatic system. There's so much about the way that we are built physiologically that we don't have to take conscious control over. We can over some of it, and you might be surprised at how much control we do have. For example, you could hold your breath. You could take conscious control over how fast and how deep you breathe. There are some things that we can really affect. Our blood pressure we can affect by using our imaginations. But that's a whole other subject. Nevertheless, most of what's going on in our brain is just supporting our daily working physiologic, how our bodies are working. We don't have to actually pay attention. It just gets done for us automatically. We call that the unconscious mind. That's just a metaphor for all that stuff. And it's there to make sense of the world and to keep us safe. And so we'll make decisions on our behalf, for example, about what's dangerous and what's not dangerous, what's comfortable, what's safe. So if you're standing in the road, crossing the road, and there's a car coming much faster than you first thought, your unconscious mind is going to clock that and have you react in an appropriate way. You sort of panic, jump and rush off the road out of harm's way. And you do all of that automatically. You don't have to stop and think and puzzle over what's the best course of action. Boom, you've just done it. It's automatic. Now then, why I'm mentioning that is because revision, which I know jolly well is important, is an important means to an end. The end is to pass your exams, and that's a means to an end, and the end is to keep your jobs and or to get promotion and to develop your career. So revision, therefore, is very important. Clearly, the right sort of revision is important. There's no point in wasting time doing stuff that doesn't work. There's no point in that at all. But revision doesn't appear to your unconscious mind as vitally important to your survival, in the way that standing in the road when there's a car coming really speaks to your unconscious mind and it will have you react and do something effectively. Because revision, therefore, isn't naturally something that your brain is inclined to pay attention to for any length of time, you need to do something. You need to have a strategy that will compensate for that and will work anyway. We human beings are hardwired to forget things. So given that that's the natural inclination, then we need to put strategies in place that will overcome that and have you remember it and have you easily retrieve it in the exam situation anyway. I think a lot of people are surprised by what we now know about the revision cycle, because I mentioned earlier on one of our members who had cut himself his time short, wasn't leaving enough time to spend enough time with the information in the first place. He hadn't got a revision cycle. He had divided up all his course manual into chunks, and he was covering several of those chunks every day, and there wasn't time to go back over stuff that he'd already looked at. So consequently, just like the rest of us, within 2 weeks, he had forgotten 80% of what he'd already learnt. So as time was going on, he was forgetting 80% of what he was learning. So in other words, he was only being 20% efficient. That's tough. So you have to keep revisiting the information that you feel that you've already learnt. So if you've learnt a chunk really thoroughly today, by spending enough time with the information in the first place, by creating notes in a form your brain likes, by just knowing the information today, that's a good solid start. But you've got to go back to it. Now you'll know this now, I appreciate that. You've got to go back to it within 24 hours and preferably after you've slept on it. And if you still remember tomorrow everything you intended to remember, then the chances are that you can go back to it in a week's time. You don't have to go back to it every day. More than likely, going back to it again and testing yourself a week later will be fine. If all is well on that occasion and you still remember everything you intended to, then you can go back to it monthly. And as you know, there's a way of doing that. It's about setting yourself a question which you answer. You close your eyes and see your notes in your mind's eye, so you're using a visual system. You say the answer out loud, so you're using your auditory system. And you write or draw with your finger in the air your notes as well, and that's using your kinesthetic system. The point being that if you were to answer your questions like that, you're using more of your brain. And to cut a long story short, that's likely to have you more easily remember what you're doing the next time you do it. Now, this revision cycle applies to each individual chunk. And as I've mentioned before, as long as you know that's what you've got to do, you can organise this yourself. But the problem is that it becomes so very unwieldy so very, very quickly that people drop out of doing that. So most people don't even know about it in the first place. So they fall short there and sell themselves, as I say, a bit short. But if they do know about it and they set off really intending to follow that cycle and to test themselves in that pattern for each individual chunk, it soon becomes unwieldy. They drop out of doing it and consequently setting themselves up for failure. Have you watched video 2, the online revision calendar? Have you watched that yet? My recommendation is that you do that you find some time. Now, this video is getting on for an hour long. It's one of the longer videos for a very good reason. I would suggest that you set yourself the task of watching that before the next webinar. Get that thing watched. Make sure that you know what you're doing. Make sure you know how to use the online revision calendar. I'm going to ask you another question now, if you wouldn't mind answering this for me so I know where you are. Are you using the online revision calendar? Yes? No, I don't intend to. No, but I haven't got round to it yet. I intend to. If you would answer that for me, I'd be grateful. Okay. All right, thank you. Now then, this is the webinar for you, because can you believe everybody on this webinar has told me that they haven't yet used the online revision calendar. So, how can I convince you how important it is to use this, I wonder? Yes, of course it's optional, but I'm very concerned that you will find any other way of keeping tabs on what you're doing becomes so onerous that you end up not doing it. I've designed this calendar with you in mind because it does take a lot of effort, and not the sort of creative effort that's fun, it's just admin. And I don't want you spending more time on admin when you're revising than you're actually spending on revising. Life's too short. You haven't got time for that. You've got your jobs and your families, and you've got a limited time before the next exam. And I know many of you have got very many exams. So please, if you haven't watched video 2, make sure you watch video 2 as soon as possible. You need to set aside an hour, but it will be worthwhile doing, because I want you to use this calendar as soon as you possibly can. Let me show you it quickly. Here's this month. You will see that some of the dates have been highlighted in blue. That's because there are some revision chunks already entered into the calendar. This is how this calendar is going to help. It's going to nudge you. It's going to tap you on the shoulder and say, "Oi, you better do some revising today," or rather, you better revisit these specific chunks today, just to make sure that you keep up with the revision cycle for this chunk. So today's the 19th. If I click through to the 19th, oh, the internet's a bit slow, isn't it? Here we go. That tells me that I have got to do this revision chunk. Now, this is a name that I've given it, Financial Services Types 2. I divided my chapter into chunks and smaller chunks and smaller chunks and smaller chunks, and I ended up with something that I was calling Financial Services Types. And even that needed dividing up because I wanted to make sure there were 7 or fewer notes on a page. So all I did was just call it Financial Services Types 1, 2, 3 and 4. It's not a big deal, it's what I've chosen to call it. And I've given it a category as well. I've done that so that I can keep tabs on what I'm covering in my course manual. I go into that in more detail in the ebook and training videos. So I've given it a category. There's my title, and that's today's date. So what? Oh, it's not today's date, is it? No, it's the exam date. Beg your pardon. But that's today's date that this revision occurs. There's today's date. The exam date is the stop date. In other words, the system's going to stop mithering me to revisit and test myself on this subject after that date, after I've done the exam. So what I need to do now is I need to go to my ring binder and find because I'm cataloguing as I'm going, of course, as I'm putting my notes into my ring binder, just as I've described in the ebook and training videos. I go straight to this. I'm looking at the question that I've devised for myself because I've filed it away with the question side up. I ask myself the question, I close my eyes and I see my notes in my mind's eye. I say them out loud and draw them in the air, and then I turn the sheet over to double check that I've remembered everything. Now, when I've done that, I either tick to say, yep, success, I've passed successfully this stage of the revision cycle, and the calendar will therefore leave the other dates in place to remind me to have another look at it on those dates. Or if I have not remembered everything that I intended to, I'm not going to make do with that as a result, because I know that I really want to remember everything. So I'm going to reset the system for that chunk so that I spend a bit more time with the information today. I go over the material, I spend more time with it, I rearrange my notes in some way to make them even better for my brain, because I'm still practicing getting the hang of the right notes for me. When I click the reset button, it makes today day 1. Never mind where you were in the cycle before, it makes today day 1, and it's going to nudge me to have another look at it tomorrow, and then all being well in a week's time, and then monthly until the exam. So it's all done automatically. I'm going to assume that it was all fine and dandy. I'm going to click to say that, yep, successfully finished. And then the calendar will just leave all the other dates for this chunk in place because I'm on track. Now, here is the overview. This shows me where I am in the sequence for these things. Here we go. Look, there's what we've just done. I've just done day 2. And it's going to nudge me in a week's time because that's going to be the next stage. I can see that with some other chunks of revision I've started, I'm a bit further ahead. Okay, so that's the overview. Let me show you how to manage your categories. These are and you see I've got them in different colours here. Manage categories. I can write any category I like in here, so it's up to me what I call my categories. I've already entered estate planning, financial services and financial planning. It's just the categories that I am calling them according to how I want to keep tabs on the work that I've got to cover for my next exam. I'm going to add a category of investment. And as you can see, I've been playing with it already, so it's helping me on my way. And I don't need to, but I'm choosing to add a category colour. Let's go for, I don't know, let's go for a nice sort of aqua turquoise colour. Add. And there it is. It's a bit light, I might change that another time actually. But there you go. So if I wanted to do some revision today, I would click on Add New Revision. Let's say I've done a couple of chunks today. So let's say that the first chunk that I've done, I'm calling Financial Services Types 1. So here we go. Because I've been playing with this before, it's already there. Financial Services Types 1. You can write anything that's useful to you in here. We've just put that in just in case you want it. You might even put the question by which you test yourself in there if you want to. But remember, you need to go to your revision sheet to check that you've remembered everything on the other side. Assign category, financial services, because that's already in there. I can choose that. This is just defaulted to today's date. The exam date is going to act as a stop. Let's go for that date. So it's going to put the sequence in for me right up until the exam stop date. Add revision. And it's in the system now. So from now on, the system will remind me when to test myself on that chunk. I can forget about it now. I can forget about it. I've put all the work in today to learn that chunk, to write my notes for that chunk. I can forget about the revision cycle for that subject because the calendar will keep telling me when I've got to pop back to it and test myself. Let's add another revision. Financing activities. And again, as I mentioned, I've been playing with it already, so it's already in there. You can write your question in there if you want to. This comes for me under my category of investment. That's defaulted to today's date because, of course, that's when I've revised the chunk the first time. The exam date, I'm going to go for the same date. See how quick that is. Add revision. And from now on, I've put that into the system. The system will remind me. Let me just do one more. Financial Services Types 2. There we go. Oops. So where are we? 18th. Assign category. This should be financial services. And it's defaulted to today's. It's because I clicked on enter or something already. I have now inputted the exam date. Add revision. And there we are. Now, if we go back to the calendar, because we've done some revision today, sure enough, that's today's date. Look, it's going to remind me tomorrow that I had better do my 24-hour check on those chunks. If I click through there to see the chunks, there they are. They're the ones that I've added today. And sure enough, it's the day 2, the 24-hour check, day 2, revision stage that I've got to do. So when I check, I test myself on the first chunk. If I correctly get it right, then I click tick. If I don't remember it, I have to do some more work, do something else to it. I can click the reset to have it start all again from tomorrow. Then I'll have to go back to it on Sunday, and so on. This is to delete. If you've decided, for example, financial services types, I divided it up into 4 chunks. If it turns out that you think you're doing that, and then it turns out that one of the chunks you really ought to divide up into two more chunks, you might choose to delete it and re-enter it as 2 separate chunks. But be careful when you're deleting. You will have a pop-up saying, "Are you sure?" But once you've put something into the system, you probably won't want to delete it until, well after the exam's over. So let's see. My revision. This is just another view of everything that you've got in there so far. And here are the entries that I've got in there so far, and you see they're categorized by color, and you've got here when I'm doing the revision, the exam date, which is the stop on the sequence of these particular things. Play around with the buttons, get the information, you can edit them, and so on. Just quickly, the last thing, sync calendars. Now, I know for some of you, this is not what you want to do. Some of you would rather not have reminders on your computer's calendar, Outlook or Google Calendar or iCal, which is the one that I'm using. If you do decide that you want the information on those calendars so that you can see amongst your meetings and other commitments that you've also got some revisiting to do, you only need to sync your calendars once. You just need to tell the system by clicking on there for the first time, just keep an eye on each other and just sync from now on. You don't have to keep clicking on there. For some people, they've got a separate calendar at work and a separate one at home, and they would really rather not muddy the water with this. You're not going to get, by the way, you're not going to find that in your computer's calendar, Outlook, iCal and so on, you're not going to find that it's cluttered with all of this stuff. You're not going to find that you can't see the wood for the trees on your computer's calendar. All it will say is that you have got some revision to do today. It'll just be one message that you've got on your calendar. So for example, I know that I try not usually to arrange anything for a few hours after this webinar, because I've got to edit and render and upload and download and get it on the website as fast as I can. But unusually today, I have a meeting I have got to get to at 12 o'clock. So there's that. There's a couple of phone calls that I've got in my calendar today, and a couple of other things that I've got to get done today that are all sitting there in my calendar. So it'd be quite useful to me to know that I've also got some revisiting to do, so that it puts it there on my calendar with everything else, so that I know that I've got to find some time to fit that in as well. But it's optional. If you decide that you want to have the nudge on your calendar, then you need to sync calendars, but you do it once. Okay? And from then on, the two will keep an eye on each other. It may not, as you add revisions here in the online revision calendar, it may not sync immediately with your calendar on your computer. We are entirely in the hands of the internet. We just know that it's going to happen at some point over the next few hours. In some cases, it might be quite quick. So you don't need to know it until the next day anyway. So that should be okay. So my message today is to remind you that we are hardwired to forget things. If you're finding that you're forgetting your revision, it's because you are a perfectly normal human being. Okay, so I give you permission to stop beating yourself up and giving yourself a hard time. Having said all of that, you also need to have a successful strategy in place to achieve your goal, which is to pass your exams. For whatever very important reasons you have for doing that. You wouldn't be putting yourself through this, would you? Unless it was important. If you're going to put yourself through this hard work, then the hard work you're doing really needs to be rewarding. You need to know that what you're doing is having the maximum impact in the direction you really want to go. And the third key, which is paying attention to the revision cycle for each individual chunk. And it'd be fine if you did all your chunks today, because you could go back to them all tomorrow. Then you could go to them all the week later. That would be dead simple to organise. But of course, that's not how it is. again, human beings remember the beginnings and ends of sessions, and we can't concentrate for long. So it makes sense to split everything up into short chunks. That also works really well for very, very busy professionals, because all you've got is short chunks here and there. So that's all fine and dandy, but then you've got to keep tabs on those chunks. You can do it however you want to, but it begins to get very unwieldy, and you end up rubbing out and erasing sequences and putting them back in, shifting it forwards by a day or a week or so. And it becomes a pain in the proverbial. You don't need to put yourself through that hassle because of this online revision calendar. That's why I've designed it. So please make that bit of effort now to, first of all, make sure you've watched the video too, and that you start using it. It does take a little bit of while to recognise, where you'll find things, what the calendar is and what the overview or how you manage categories and so on. But it doesn't take long at all. It's very, very simple. It's meant to be something that will help you enormously. So once you've entered in your revision chunk, do a revision chunk, enter it in. Do another revision chunk, enter it into the system. And then you can relax and know that it's going to remind you. If you don't sync it up to your computer's calendar, then you need to have a look at the calendar here on the website every day, of course, to make sure that you know when it's trying to nudge you. Some people organise that when they open up their browser, as you can see, I happen to be using Firefox, that the calendar automatically opens up on one of the tabs. So there are ways of doing that, so that as you open up the browser, automatically you can see your calendar, and this will be the view that I'm sure you'll choose, so that you can see today's date and see whether I've done for today, see? So I haven't got to worry about it now, but I do have to look at something tomorrow. And as you can see, a week tomorrow. These are in there because I've already entered revisions in the past, and then nudging me on other things that I've got to do on those dates. So that's it for this week. Are there any questions about that? Anything that I can help you with that will have you use this online revision calendar? Any questions? You can put your hand up or type something into the box. No, everybody happy with that? So all of you on the call said that you're not using it yet, but you intend to. There's no time like the present. The sooner you start using it, the faster you'll get the hang of it. It really is very, very simple. The faster you get the hang of it, and the quicker you'll just take out one load of admin, one load of worry, and take care of one of the 3 keys of learning. This is the thing that's going to be a big influence on you remembering 80% of what you're learning ongoingly. Going into an exam knowing that the work you've put in is rewarding you with 80% recall or more, hey, it depends how thorough you are, then that's a hugely powerful thing. So the reason I'm doing all of this is because I'm motivated to give you what you need to give yourselves the very best opportunity to excel. You've got it all here. Please use it. Let me know your success stories. Let me know your headaches. Anywhere that I can help you, give me a shout and I'll do my very best. So that's it for this week. Have a good week, have a productive week, and good luck with the calendar. Bye-bye.